All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for the introduction. It's even hard for me to spit out those titles because they're so bloody long and people just zone out halfway through it. So thank you for persisting. For those of you that don't know me, I'm James Biggs. I grew up on Mamu, Jitterbulg and Bulgan country, and that's the land of the Cassowary people up in North Queensland. Just so it turns out that my family, my ancestors rather, also displaced a whole lot of Indigenous people up in Mamu, Jitterbulg country back when the dairy farming industry started up there. But I've had some really open and frank discussions with those First Nations people and have made amends with those people. So there is a lot of value to truth telling, and I'd encourage you to do that. So I've been fortunate enough to wear a few hats for the Zoo and Aquarium Association, or maybe unfortunate enough. One of them is as the head of delegation to the biodiversity-related multilateral treaties like the Convention on Biological Diversity and CITES. And today I'm going to talk about the intersection between ex situ conservation practice and global biodiversity policy framework, specifically the indicators under the GBF, or the Global Biodiversity Framework. And when I say ex situ in this context, I'm referring to anything with a fence around it, and we can argue over afternoon tea whether you agree with that definition or not, but that's how I'm defining it here. So if you work with something that has a fence around it, I'm here to help you to align with the global framework, and also to help you identify institutional metrics if that's something that you're struggling with. So today we'll interrogate whether the indicators are suitable proxies for institutional impact, and if not, how we can improve measurement frameworks to reflect actual conservation outcomes. Now, the goal is really to make a connection between what institutions do on the ground and what is reported at the policy level, without oversimplifying or overstating our contribution. So for a little bit of context, I think everyone here is familiar with the Convention on Biological Diversity, but just in case you aren't, it's one of a number of international treaties, biodiversity-related multilateral treaties, that was established under the United Nations Environment Programme, and it has near universal participation amongst members. So there's about 196 parties to the convention. It has three main objectives, the first of which is the conservation of biological diversity. The second is the sustainable use of its components. And the third is, equitable sharing of the benefits derived from the use of genetic material. So under this convention, the world has adopted the new Global Biodiversity Framework, which is the new ACIUCN targets, the ones we did so well at last decade, and the new biodiversity plan for life on Earth. And that new plan contains 4 goals and 21 targets, all of which are set to help the world be better on track to be living in harmony with nature by 2050. And progress towards these goals and targets, in a nutshell, will be measured by using a really extensive set of indicators that have been agreed by the parties. And those indicators are the ones that I'll be talking about today. At its core, I think we all know why impact measurement matters. It's about knowing whether we're actually making a difference, not just assuming it. And without credible metrics, we really can't distinguish between conservation actions that are merely active and those that are genuinely effective, which is what was said in the opening statement here as well. We all operate with finite resources and expanding mandates, but measurement tells us really where to focus, I think. It also allows us to speak credibly to governments and donors and partners, especially when we claim to be aligned with global goals. But if we're going to use policy language, we need to back it with evidence. So the CBD indicators are designed to allow parties to report on progress on the targets in the new Global Biodiversity Framework. Targets like halting extinctions, protecting habitats and mobilising finance. And examples of some of the headline indicators that are being used under the framework are the Red List Index, the green status of species, and other things like the volume of biodiversity-related relevant finance. So they're useful for consistency and for comparison, and they help to establish coherence across parties, but they were built for macro-level reporting. Not to evaluate performance of institutions or programs or partnerships, and that distinction is really critical. There are some really clear areas where the CBD indicators overlap quite meaningfully with what ex situ institutions already do. For example, Target 4 includes genetic diversity and extinction metrics. It's relevant to species breeding, insurance populations, reintroductions, a lot of the work that we've touched on here today already. And Target 12, for example, highlights urban green space and access to nature, which fits the physical footprint and education mandate of a lot of zoos. And Target 19, for example, speaks directly to financial contributions that we make to conservation, both through internal investment and by raising external funds. So these indicators aren't the problem, I don't think. It's the assumption that an indicator alone can reflect institutional performance that needs a bit more scrutiny. The limitations, I think, are structural. Most CBD indicators operate at a national scale, and they're intended to do that. That's the entire reason we've established those, so that we can report nationally. They rely on data sets that are updated every couple of years or every few years. They often reflect outcomes that are dependent on multiple variables as well. So it means they can miss the intermediate contributions of ex situ work. A lot of the detailed stuff, which is things like genetic rescue, public awareness, and threat mitigation stuff. So for instance, if a species remains critically endangered, the Red List Index doesn't change, even if your institution has bred 80% of the surviving population. It doesn't shift the index at all, but how do we tell that story in the context of global indicators if there's no means to do so? The problem isn't that the indicator's wrong, it's that it isn't granular enough to reflect what's actually happening on the ground. So I think the solution, in my mind at least, is not to abandon the CBD indicators, but to embed them in a broader framework. So if you use them to show your relevance to global targets, but don't rely on them to tell your whole story as an ex situ institution. And this is where the institutional metrics might be helpful. So these are the day-to-day indicators that track what your team controls, whether it's gene diversity, retention, survival rates, outreach numbers, or funding raised. But that dual level approach recognises that conservation operates at across different scales. The high level indicators from the Global Biodiversity Framework provide alignment, but institutional metrics are going to provide that resolution, and I think that's the type of reporting that NGOs and ex situ organisations should have a bit more of a discussion about how we can report to the Commonwealth Government to support their national reporting to CBD. Together, I think, though, they do enable strategic coherence and operational rigour. So I'll look at a couple of examples. Target 4, again, focuses on preventing extinction and retaining genetic diversity. And I mentioned that the CBD uses the Red List Index, excuse me, and effective population size thresholds to help determine whether the world is on track for this target. Really great big picture stuff for countries. But at the institutional level, ex situ organisations can track the percentage of gene diversity retained in a managed population, usually aiming for the 90% threshold over 100 years. You can also report the effective population size across institutions as well. Really important information that's missing from the indicators. And they're not abstract indicators, they directly influence whether a species recovery program is viable. So it's interesting stuff. It helps to frame that narrative. And they also don't show up in national reports unless someone aggregates and submits them. So sorry, Fiona and DQ, we're probably going to submit a whole bunch of stuff that hopefully will help to build the narrative that Australia's on track to meet our targets. Target 12 is another example. I won't go into too much detail here, but a lot of zoos sit within or adjacent to urban centres and serve as major access points for green space. That's one of the key indicators under the framework. But again, if we're serious about measuring outcomes beyond species, these are the sort of things that we need to start talking about. Is not that supporting the national level reporting, but also identifying institutional metrics as well. So the process of impact measurement, it needs to start with identifying the conservation function that you have, whether it's a species recovery, public engagement, financing or other. and proceed through alignment with the CBD targets and then matched with institutional metrics. And CBD's indicators, they offer structure, but they aren't designed to capture that real-time, often incremental work that we do and other ex situ actors. So if you want to be visible in the global biodiversity space, speak the language of the CBD, but if you want to be effective, we need to own our metrics, rooted in our actions, under our control and grounded in species outcomes. Use both and we'll have a much fuller story to tell. Thanks.